Hi there friends, welcome to episode 3 of my limited run series, Learn to Design, Then Knit. Today we're going to be talking about yardage estimates for the project that you're designing. Before we get into that, I want to respond to 2 questions that were from last episode's video that I thought might be helpful for other people. Sometimes when I respond to them in the comments, they don't get seen by everybody, so I thought this was a great way to cover them. So the first question is, when considering ease, do I need to account for yarn content? For example, 100% acrylic yarn stretches differently than a cotton or acrylic blend. I know the stitch and gauge I use for the fabric will also need to be considered. So that's why we not only knit a swatch, but we knit a large swatch and block it. So the ease of a garment simply has to do with the wearability of it. More ease means it's going to be larger and therefore fit more oversized. Less ease means it's going to be more fitted, in some cases smaller than our body, so that it's very fitted. What is going to affect the drape of that garment based on the ease that you choose is the fabric that, or the fiber content in the fabric that you create. So this person asked a really good question, but I wouldn't say that it has necessarily anything to do with ease specifically. So let's use my swatch as an example. This is a 100% superwash merino yarn. Because I have knit it at such a loose gauge, it is quite drapey. That doesn't necessarily factor into the ease of the garment. Because I'm going to be wearing it with quite a bit of positive ease, and because the fabric is drapey, it will wear more drapey on me. If I had knit this same swatch in, say, 100% alpaca, it's going to be far drapier. You're not going to get the bounce that I get out of this fabric. It will just hang. So that's not necessarily directly related to the ease of the garment you choose, but rather the fiber content of your fabric. And that's why we swatch. This larger swatch is going to tell you what the fabric is going to do after you have washed it. Blocked it, same word, or same function, I should say, not the same word. So when you knit your swatch before you block it, measure it, pick it up, see what it does. After you block it, remeasure it again. See how much growth you get. See how much drape or hang you get. Something like an alpaca is going to really just hang and not bounce much at all. Something that is bouncy like a merino is going to bounce back regardless of how drapey the fabric is. Yes, I suppose you do want to consider the fiber content when you are working your swatch because you want to know how the fabric will lay, but it's not directly tied to ease. Certainly the more ease you have, meaning the more fabric you have larger than the size of your body, the more hang you will get. So use your swatch to tell you what the fabric is going to do. I'm not sure I have another way to say that. It is a good question. It's just that ease and fabric don't necessarily relate to each other because when we do our actual calculations for our garment and as we do our calculations for our yardage estimates today, we're going to be working off a blocked swatch. And the idea is that your blocked swatch tells you exactly what your fabric is going to look like when you wear it. Now, I do want to say that a larger swatch will tell you more than a smaller swatch. A 4x4 inch swatch can still be very indicative of the project that you're going to make, but if you're going to be working with a fabric with alpaca in it, you know, some of the drapier fibers, I'm picking on alpaca because I'm very familiar with how it moves, is a larger swatch is going to tell you more. If you feel like you have the time, we have time between these videos. Another great method to see what the fabric will do over the course of the day is to take your swatch dry, just as it is after you've blocked it, and on the bottom bar of a clothes hanger, put a clothespin in each edge of your swatch and just let it hang for 24 or 48 hours. If you want to get crazy, you could even take a little spray bottle and spray it with a little mist to simulate the perspiration that we have on our body throughout the day. After those 24 to 48 hours, take that swatch down, and without giving it too much time to bounce back, measure it again. See if you get additional growth. My experience with cotton, for example, can be that when you block it and allow it to dry, it really contracts back. But over the course of the day of wear, because it's a very heavy fiber, it does stretch out quite a bit. So the larger the swatch, the more information that you are going to get. So I hope that helps the person that asked that question. Our second question is one where I'm going to have to say I don't know everything. So here is the question. When should you use your upper bust measurement in determining ease? I don't like tight fits, but I've got pardon me, I reversed that. I've got smaller shoulders and a larger bust. Here's where I say I don't know everything. So I have never worked from the perspective of upper chest measurements. I know that there are some designers that work with this every time they design. It's not something that I feel particularly comfortable speaking to. My general understanding is you would use that upper bust circumference to be a more relative size to your shoulders, and perhaps if you have a smaller waist, if you have a larger chest. What I would imagine needs to happen, and again, I'm speaking with very little experience here, is that in order to get the chest to have the correct amount of positive ease, if it's larger than the rest of your frame, you would have to use short row shaping to add bust darts to the garment. I have spoken about that in a previous episode in my regular podcast, Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. And in that video, I also say I don't have much experience with bust darts, but I do provide links to resources from other people who are very familiar with them. So I will say I don't feel comfortable speaking directly about that, but I will put a link to my original video about bust darts in the description below this video, so you can go take a look at that and see what resources they may have for you to use the upper chest circumference as your measurement. My preference and my experience is based on using a full chest circumference and then modifying the body circumference as needed. The nice thing about a raglan garment is you can make the shoulder or the neckline width as narrow as you would like it to be. So with a raglan, you have a lot of control over the shaping at the top of your garment relative to your chest. So if you're willing to take this journey with me, I think you may find that you'll learn a lot about how the shape of a garment relates to the different parts of your body. I also have a fairly large chest relative to my shoulders, so maybe going through this video journey with us will help you see how you can start to tailor things. But one more time, I'm going to link to the description in the description below to the video where I talk about bust darts and how that may relate to an upper chest circumference. Okay, so now let's get down to the heart of today's episode. Today we are going to take our swatch and our garment sketches and make an estimate of the yardage that we're going to need for our project, so you can either check your stash to make sure that you have enough or get it ordered. Next week we are going to take all of this information, including our gauge, and actually start writing the pattern so you can start get knitting. So just 2 more weeks and then we can start casting on. This week is a really important step though, so we can make sure we have enough yardage for our project. And I'm hoping to walk through it in a way where you can see exactly how I do the math, so you can then input your own numbers. So to get started, the very first thing we're going to need is our swatch and a scale of some kind. This is just a little digital kitchen scale that I have. If you don't already have one in your collection, I would recommend getting one of these. It is not actually flashing when I look at it. This is obviously a refresh rate between the light in my scale and the video recorder, so I apologize for that. I will still give you full numbers. The second thing we're going to need simply is our swatch. The reason we want to measure this in grams is it's a smaller unit than an ounce, so it's a lot easier to work with whole numbers in grams rather than decimal ounces. And the process is very simple. I just fold up my swatch so it fits easily on the scale, and I'm just going to lay it on the scale, and it's giving me a weight of 15 grams, and I promise it's not blinking on my end. Okay, so that bit is done. We just weighed our swatch. We can move that out of the way. So I have already done all of the math here. I'm going to walk through all of it with you. I just didn't have a calculator that wasn't on my phone, which is what I'm recording with. So when you go to do your math, make sure you set up a section called swatch weight, and you'll note I've got it in grams, and I'm going to put that 15 grams right in that category. Next, we're going to physically measure the outside dimensions of our swatch. So we're going to lay out our swatch, and we're not going to fuss over this. You can see mine is not perfectly square. I could zhuzh it out to different dimensions if I wanted to, but we want this to accurately reflect the garment once we're done knitting and blocking it. Because I don't want to have to pin out my garment every time I wash it, I didn't pin out my swatch, which is why I have some slightly irregular edges. This is completely normal. Now all we're going to do is take a ruler, and we want to find the total square area of our swatch. Now, because this swatch is not square, we're going to take multiple dimensions both horizontally and vertically across the swatch, average them out, and find the square area based on that. If I was to just take a really, turn my ruler the right side up, sorry about that. If I was to take a really quick measurement and lay this down, I might say that my swatch is 7¼ inches by, say, 5¾ inches. If I was going to roughly estimate that, I would say it's around 42 square inches. But because we do want to try to get as close as we can so we don't under order yarn or over order yarn, we're going to take multiple measurements. So using whatever straight edge you use, you can use a tape measure for this if you prefer. I don't recommend a sewist's tape measure just because the flexibility in it makes it slightly inaccurate. So I would use a hard measuring tool such as a ruler or a tape measure. And we're going to take 3 measurements horizontally across our swatch. In the case of this position, it's 7½ inches. We'll take a second one about halfway down, and I am actually just below 8 inches. And one more near the bottom above any garter edging you may have added to your swatch. And once again, I am just below 8 inches. So I used slightly different numbers because I happened to hold my ruler in a different location. But if we go back to our worksheet here, just below the swatch weight where I indicated 15 grams, I measured the width 3 times. My first measurement, I got 7¾ My second measurement, I got 7 7/8, and my third, I got 7 9/16 of an inch. I added all 3 of those numbers up to come up with 23.14, and then to get the average, I divide it by 3 because we took 3 measurements. That works out to be an average width of my swatch of 7.71 inches. Now we want to do the exact same thing vertically across the swatch. So pick 3 locations and measure 3 vertical distances up and down your swatch. Once again, try to avoid any garter edges that you may have added, simply because those won't necessarily be relevant to the finished size of your garment. But when I say that, I want to make clear that when you take your measurement, you do include the full depth, including those garter edges. You just don't want to be putting your ruler in the garter edge. You want to be measuring over your fabric. Okay, so now I've done the same thing that I did with my width measurements. I have 3 height measurements. I have a 6, a 5.75, and a 6 and 11/16, meaning it was slightly taller than 6 inches. So when I add all 3 of these measurements up, I got 18.4 inches, which I then divided by 3 because we took 3 measurements, and I came up with an average height of 6.15 inches. So once we know that we have our 2 average width measurements and height measurements, we multiply those 2 numbers together, 7.71 by 6.15, so our width by our height, and we get 47.42 square inches. So I now know that my 15-gram swatch has a square area of 47.42 square inches. That's my swatch. Your numbers will obviously be different from mine, but that's the process. So once we know the weight and our square area, we need to determine how many grams of yarn we need to use per square inch so we can order the right quantity. So I have got a 15-gram swatch, which I then divide by my 47.42 square inches, because that's the square area of my swatch, and I determine that it takes me 0.316 grams of yarn to knit 1 square inch. Now, this seems pretty abstract at this point, but we are going to use this very important number to determine how much yarn we need to order. Now that we know how many grams of yarn we need per square inch of our garment, we have to break our garment down into its individual shapes and transpose these measurements onto those individual shapes so we can figure out the square area of each piece of our garment. So this is my original design that I showed you previously. This is a copy of one that I did already. My original one had the little hash marks on it to indicate my stitch pattern. But these are all of the dimensions that I've determined I want my garment to be. When I break down this garment into its seamed parts, we end up with 2 relatively simple shapes. The front and the back of the garment have a trapezoidal top portion of the garment, followed by a rectangle in the bottom of the garment. The sleeves themselves are also trapezoids. We've got the narrow top of our shoulders where we increase down to the bottom width of our sleeves. Now, in a design, our sleeves are always going to be identical to one another. In a front and back of a garment, we can experience a slight difference. If there was absolutely no short row shaping and no neckline shaping, meaning it was a boat neck sweater, this is exactly the shape it would be. It would be straight across the top. Because we want to have some neckline shaping, we would sort of dash in a line approximating what our neckline edge is going to look like. However, because we are going to be adding some short rows to the back end of our garment, I am not going to omit any yardage from the neckline, assuming that it will be roughly the same amount of area that we add to the back of our garment for the short rows. This simplifies the process of estimating yardage quite significantly. If you wanted to drill down to the minutest square inch, you could draw out a secondary shape that mimics this, including all of the shaping for your neckline, whether it's a V-neck or a crew neck like I've got here, and try to find small pieces that you can get dimensions off of. But for the sake of this garment, and this is how I approach any garment that I design, I simply omit any neckline shaping, knowing that it will account for any short rows that we decide to add to the garment. The last detail that we want to make sure we have is the dimensions of our collar. In a raglan sweater, we have basically a square collar outline. We have the front edge of our neck, which we could call this the front if we wanted to, and the back edge is exactly the same. And the top edge of each of our sleeves makes up the side. So all we're going to do is add in the width of our neckline edges from our front and back, as well as the width of our top of shoulder, which is this width right here. Then we will add or multiply this by the depth of our target collar. So I'm going to walk through all of this with you. I just wanted to give you an idea of where I'm going to be pulling numbers from my original sketch. So here is my original sketch, and I'm kind of battling scale here. I kind of want to have them side by side, but then I worry the numbers won't be very legible. So what I'm going to do is sort of flip the pages back out of the way as best I can so you're not seeing this, but I'll explain to you where I'm getting my numbers from. So first and foremost, let's start with the collar because that's a fairly easy number to derive. So I know I want my back collar width to be 7.5 inches wide. This is at the base of the collar where we're going to be picking up stitches. So I know that my back cast on neck width from my collar is 7.5 inches. That's this number right here. If I say that this total width is 2 inches, then my side of collar is 2 inches. I'm going to cross out these S's and F's and B's because I think it's confusing. So my back neck I'm going to say is 7.5 inches. The top of my sleeve, which makes up the side of my neckline, is 2 inches. And that will be exactly the same on this side. And lastly, the front collar, because I've mentioned we're going to be omitting this shaping because we're going to be adding that yardage back in as short rows, I'm simply going to treat this as this was a boat neck and it's straight across. So I'm going to say that the front of my collar is also 7.5 inches. So to find the circumference of our collar, we're simply going to add these four numbers together. And I didn't do this bit ahead of time, so you get to do it with me. So 7.5 and 7.5 is 15. And we've got 2 and 2 is 4. So I'm going to say that my base neckline circumference is 19 inches. I've decided also that I would like my collar depth to be 1.25 inches, meaning once I've picked up all of the stitches around my neckline edge and I work my ribbing, I want it to be 1.25 inches. So I'm going to take that circumference measurement of 19 inches and multiply it by 1.25 inches is 23.75 square inches. So this is my very first number that I am going to use to come up with the total square inches of my garment. And I'm just going to add it right to my sketch sheet. I'm just going to say my collar area equals 23.75 square inches. Now we're going to repeat this same process with each part of our garment. As we've already established with the collar, the sleeve, my top edge here is going to be 2 inches. My lower collar, why do I keep saying collar? My lower sleeve circumference is going to be 16 1/4 inches. So I'm going to put my 16 1/4 inches down here. I now also know from last week's video that my target yoke depth for the garment that I want to make is 8 3/4 inches from this high point shoulder, the cast on edge, down to the underarm. Because I've established that the width of my shoulder is going to be 2 inches, the half width of that shoulder is 1 inch. So I'm going to subtract that 1 inch from my target of 8 3/4 inches, so I get 7 3/4 inches. So the shape of my sleeve now from the cast on edge to the bottom edge where before I start any hem treatment is going to be 7 3/4 inches. And last but not least, I am going to add the same 1.25 inches of ribbing to the bottom of my sleeve as a cuff. That means my total length of my sleeve would be 9 inches total when I add up those two. But we're going to treat this depth of 1.25 inches and this depth of 7 3/4 inches a little bit differently when it comes to finding the square area of this shape. So this top portion of our sleeve, before we get to the cuff, is a trapezoid. The formula for a trapezoid, let's call this A, this B, and we'll call this H for height. So the formula for a trapezoid is A plus B divided by 2, and then that's multiplied by H. So our A is 2, our B is 16.14. This is the target width of your sleeve, or pardon me, 16.25. So we get a total of 18.25, and then we divide that by 2. 18.25 divided by 2 is 9.125. So now I know that the multiplier against the height is going to be 9.125. Just to go through that one more time, our A is 2, our B is 16.25. We add those two numbers together and divide it by 2 to get our, let's call this our C. We're going to say this is C. So now C times H, which is our target yoke depth before we work any cuff, is going to be our trapezoid area. So if we say 7.75 times 9.125, we have a square area of this trapezoid section of our sleeve of 70.72 square inches. I realize I'm running out of room. I hope this is still legible enough for you. 70.72 inches. All right. However, we now also have to take into consideration the ribbing of our sleeve. This ribbing is going to be the full circumference of the lower portion of our sleeve. So we're going to multiply that bottom circumference of our sleeve, 16.25 in my case, by the target depth that we want this ribbing to be, which for me is 1.25 inches. So we're going to do 16.25 times 1.25, and we get an area of 20.3 inches. So we now have got two square areas for our one sleeve. So we'll simply add this 70.72 to our 20.3, and we get a total square area of one sleeve of 91.02 square inches. However, we have two sleeves on our garment. So we're going to multiply this number, our 91.02, which is the total square area of the trapezoid of the sleeve, plus the rectangle that will become the cuff, by 2, and we get a result of 182 square inches. So because this is a mess, we're going to go back to our cleaner sheet and go into our area where we're calculating or collecting our square areas, and we're going to say sleeves, and we're going to say it's 182 square inches. So this includes both sleeves. Make sure that once you calculate one, that you take that answer and multiply it by 2 to account for both sleeves. Now we're going to do essentially the exact same math for the body of our garment. We're going to find the square area of the trapezoid, which remember is the A plus B. This is going to be A for our back neckline width. Oh, why is that going blurry? Apologies. A for our back neckline width. And then we're going to draw an imaginary dashed line from one underarm to the other underarm and call that B. This here, this width, is going to be half of our garment total circumference. So in my case, I've got my target circumference of my garment here to be 48 1/4. So for me, this is going to be 24 1/16 of an inch. My A is going to be 7.75 inches. And we're just going to follow this exact same formula for the top. And then for the body of the sweater, we're going to treat it just as a rectangle. We will take our 24 1/16 of an inch, or whatever your half circumference measurement is, and multiply it by the depth of our garment, which for me is 14 inches. Once we come up with the square area for the top trapezoid and add it to the square area of the bottom rectangle of our body, we will once again multiply that by 2, because this shape is indicative of both the front of the garment and the back of the garment. I'm going to do the math really quickly and come back so you don't have to sit and watch me do it all over again. Okay, so you got to watch me do all of my math very quickly. I found that based on my measurements, the square area of my yoke is 98.25 square inches. The square area of my body below the underarms to the hem is 336.9 square inches. I added those two dimensions together to come up with the full square area of the back of my garment, which is 435.125. Next, I multiplied that by 2 so that we're taking into account both the front and the back of the garment, and I come up with a total of 870.25 square inches. So one more time, I'm going to take that back to my area where I'm collecting the square areas, and I'm going to say body/yoke equals, what did I just say? 870.25 inches. Now we're simply going to add these three numbers together to find out the total square area of our entire garment. So this works out to be 1,076.59 square inches. Now, I'm not going to worry about 0.59. I'm simply going to say that I have 1,077 square inches in my entire garment. Now we're going to go back to that very special number that we calculated of grams per square inch. I now know how many square inches I have. 1,077 square inches times 0.316 grams per square inch. That works out to 340.3 grams. Now, this number is really important because it's going to relate directly to the number of grams that you have per skein of yarn. For example, the fluffy fingering from UU Yarns that I'm going to be using for this project has got, I'm going to see if I can get this in close enough so you can read it. It has got 200 yards or 180 meters per 50 grams. This 50 grams is going to be our key. So I'm going to take whatever my number is in grams and divide it by the total grams in my skein of yarn. If you're working with 100 gram skeins, you would divide your number by 100. If you're working in 25 gram skeins, you would divide by 25. So 340.3 divided by 50 is 6.8. Now, I cannot order 6.8 skeins of yarn. I am going to round this up to the next nearest number. I am going to round this up to be 7 skeins of fluffy fingering. That's how much I need for my project based on my gauge swatch. If you have got a fabric in your swatch that is not as consistent as this. For example, my entire garment is going to be this fisherman's stockinette. So I don't have, say, a panel with decorative stitches that include cable work or anything like that. If you have got a swatch with a slightly different motif in it in one section, for example, if you've got stockinette stitch on the outside and a cable panel in the middle, I would recommend adding 5% to this estimate. So instead of ordering 7 skeins, you may end up ordering 8. This just gives you a small amount of buffer because our swatch isn't going to tell us that the cable section of our swatch used X amount of yardage and our stockinette portion of our swatch used a certain amount of yardage. We're averaging that amount over both fabrics. So just be sure that if you've got a really yarn heavy motif like something like cables or baubles especially, that you add in just a little bit extra, somewhere between 5 and 10% to that amount so that you order the right amount. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time learning about how designers and editors approach estimating yardage for projects. In 2 weeks, we are going to get into episode 4 where we start to actually do the math for our specific projects so we can cast on. We're going to start with the back and then go from there. So join me again in 2 weeks where we turn to more math, because I know today was pretty math heavy, and we'll get you going on your summer top. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and as always, happy knitting.